I'm Marilee Utter, Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate. Thank you for joining today's episode of our What's Next webinar series, which we're very pleased to be doing in partnership with Neighboring today. Our topic is institutional investment and talent management, a hot topic across all industries, but certainly especially here. For those of you not familiar with the Counselors of Real Estate, we are a global organization of accomplished leaders dedicated to addressing the world's real estate challenges. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers, counselors practice in 21 countries and offer expertise in over 60 disciplines of every asset class. This webinar represents the very essence of the compelling and timely thought leadership the counselors are known for. To make this series possible, let me thank our 2022 sponsors, Altus Group, Busak Real Estate, and Equus Capital Partners. If you would like to learn more about the Counselors of Real Estate and our 1,000 credentialed professionals, please visit our website, cre.org. There, you will also be invited and have access to a free subscription to our excellent professional journal, Real Estate Issues. We look forward to you participating, to your questions, and a very interactive session. So please use the Q&A feature on your computer, and we'll make every effort to get to all of them in the course of this session. So let's get to it. It's really my pleasure now to introduce your moderator. Jonathan Schein, CRE, is CEO and Executive Director of the Real Estate Limited Partner Institute in New York City. Jonathan's platform connects pension funds, endowments, foundations, asset managers, family offices, who are all devoted to the best practices in real estate asset allocation and investments. But you may actually know him a little better as the founder of GlobeStreet.com, a popular real estate online and information website for the real estate industry. Jonathan also created Real Share Conferences, one of the industry's largest event and conference groups. Let me tell you, he's a real entrepreneur. There's a lot more than that. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy his sense of humor as well. So Jonathan, I'll hand it over to you to introduce our panelists and get us underway.
Thanks, Marilee. Very much appreciated. And this is quite a topic. I also want to make sure that everybody understands what NAREIN is, one of our co-sponsors, which is the National Association of Real Estate Investment Managers, which obviously dovetails into a lot of what we do here. So we're going to talk about talent ROI, and I'd like to introduce our panelists. And first of all, I'd like them to introduce themselves. And Kara, it's good to see you. Thank you for making it. Why don't we start with Kara first?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm Kara Brown. I am Chief Compliance Officer, General Counsel, Head of HR, Chair of the Compensation Committee at Cabot Properties, Inc. We are a Boston-based private equity real estate advisor. We're in the industrial space and have been around for about 35 years.
Thank you. Courtney?
Hi, I'm Courtney Brooks, and I'm the Assistant VP of Talent Acquisition at Waterton Residential, based out of Chicago, and where I actually sit today. Typically, I'm not here. And we are a private equity investment firm, mostly in the multifamily, senior living, and then some in the hotel and SFR space.
Wonderful. And Sherrida?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Sherrida Traynham. I'm a Senior Vice President in the Human Resources Group at Clarion Partners, and I cover our investment side of the firm from an HR perspective. I'm also responsible for talent management, employee engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion activities as well at Clarion. And Clarion has been around for 40 years. We are a real estate investment management firm, and we invest in all 4 food groups, all asset classes, with primarily institutional investors.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And obviously there's a common thread here is that all 3 of these wonderful people are with private equity fund managers specializing in real estate. So let's get to it. Let's talk about what we're really here for today, which is about talent acquisition and talent retention. And in real estate, the common phrase is location, 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 but in your roles, it's people, people, people. And so why don't we start at what is the big news these days outside of the Great Resignation is how are you able to attract talent today? There are so many more variables that we hadn't expected 2 years ago. Let me start with Courtney. And this can go for all aspects and all roles, not just capital raising.
Yeah, so I think it's really pushing our team and our company to continue to be creative as it relates to recruiting and attracting top talent. And so I think like most organizations now, we've seen wages rise a decent amount. We've seen it certainly be a candidate market, and so I think internally it's trying to balance. How do we continue to be an employer of choice? How do we attract top talent? And at the same time, how do we retain the people that we have, but advertise all the good that we have? So I know that, we spend a lot of time looking at different ways to recruit talent, different avenues that maybe we have thought about in the past. And so I think those are some of the ways that we've started to navigate, because it seems even in the last month, a shift of what people are looking for in terms of even just being in the office and the flexibility that companies provide. So it's keeping us on our toes.
Yeah, well, we'll get to flexibility in the office in a moment. After all, there's a lot of office out there. Sherrida.
Yeah. So totally agree with Courtney. I think culture has now become critical after coming out of the pandemic. People are a lot more focused and had a lot more time to think about their holistic well-being, right? And so getting people, to come back into the office and also thinking about my career, career trajectory. If I'm back, what does my life look like? What will it look like in 2 years? What is the culture of the firm? People, I think we're seeing a generation that wants to be tied to firms that are more purpose-driven, or at least have some sort of purpose-driven activities that they're focused on, that they can align themselves with. So that piece is becoming increasingly important. So we've beefed up our employee engagement considerably over the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months, and not just to keep people happy in the office, but to give people that platform to engage and to remind them what it feels like again to sit and have pizza Wednesdays, right? And grab a slice and meet the new analysts on the team that you may not talk to. So we're providing a lot of opportunities for connectivity between our employees.
And thank you. And Kara?
Sure. And I think like Sherrida, we're thinking about engagement in this discussion. I think that our best ambassadors for bringing in new talent is our current group of employees, and making sure that they feel included, that they feel like they have a sense of where their career is going, to what Sherrida was saying. So we're really increasing our communications around several different aspects that all eventually relate to engagement and recruiting. So that's compensation, having more of a process around that and being a little bit more formal in our approach and our communications, our incentive programs. We're looking to ensure that the employees make informed decisions as they come in and as they depart. So we're trying to think of the pieces that can help with that.
So let's focus a little on culture right now, because from what kind of Sherrida kind of alluded to, culture may be changing. And what we used to think as corporate culture, being together all the time, simply is not happening right now. Looking forward, just to base it on some statistics that came out last week from the Partnership for the City of New York, according to Castle Systems, office occupancy is at about 38% right now. But if you drill down a little further, actually not too much further, 5 days a week, we're now at 8%. In other words, there's a lot of unutilized space all the time. So we will hopefully build up from 8%, or we have bigger issues on our plate. But how do you build a culture within an organization that simply is not showing up in the office anymore? Who would like to start with that? And then we have questions from the audience. I'd love to hear from that as well. Or our culture is just simply going to change. Pizza Wednesday sounds fantastic. We're coming over, but how do you rebuild this?
Yeah, Jonathan, I'll start. Something that we're focused on. So first of all, it's going to take the full team, right? This is not something that lies just with senior leadership. I think our managers, and we are putting a lot of focus on managers, will play a big part. And so if it is a hybrid workforce, which many of our firms, I think all of our firms are in some sort of hybrid model and has a degree of flexibility, we are looking to our managers to help to provide that connectivity. And so bringing your team in on the same day. So we have this notion of core days, which seems to be working well. So we have teams, they're in together on the same day. So that way you're not sort of coming in, but your analyst might not be in, or your MD is not in. Everyone's in together to the extent possible. And that is one way that's fostering some of the connectivity. And the other thing we're thinking about now as we look to sort of roll out what we believe will be our long-term plan is office-wide days as well, where you have everyone in on the same day. So we are affording you flexibility because during the week you will be able to pick 2 days that make sense for you personally, but the remaining 3 will be a little bit more focused. And we're doing that now, and it seems to be working well because teams are together.
Okay, Kara?
I think the flexibility is critical. I think the candidates we're talking to are mentioning it in very early preliminary conversations even. It's important to them, so we offer it now. We are on a 3-2 schedule for most employees. We also want to make sure that our candidates coming in after they've been here a certain amount of time and have the ability to engage, that they settle into a schedule like that. I think there are benefits to being in this flexible situation. We're a global company with offices in Sydney and London and Amsterdam. So it's easier in some ways to have these virtual meetings, but it doesn't replace the in-person conversations. So we're really focused recently, now that COVID is subsiding in certain ways, to having our senior people get out on the road, making sure that they're physically present in some of those offices, that they have the opportunities to train, to speak with people in person, whether it's people coming into our office in Boston or vice versa. But we want those personal connections to hear if the flexibility is working. Do people need more around this? Do they need less? What are they seeing and what do they need? And we also, on the employee engagement side of things, are putting out a survey. We do want to hear from our employees, at all levels, at all legacy in terms of their time here, to really find out what works for them. And then it's really up to their managers and them on the performance side. Is the flexibility working for them? Is it something that could help them on the performance side to be less flexible? We're having those discussions.
So what you're saying is some people may have to show up more if they want to continue with the organization, if they want to.
Perhaps. If it's a training issue, that could make a big difference. It really depends on the employee and their drive. I think you have to be more intentional if you're not physically present, and not everyone is willing to go to that length.
Well, thank you. And the concept of not being in the office 5 days a week. When I started in this business, there wasn't even a thing called casual Friday. So I'm really trying to catch up here. Courtney.
Yeah, so I would, agree and just say it's flexibility, and it's starting to understand that it's very personal and individual. And so, but to that notion, I think similarly, we have, 2 core days that we prefer people be in the office, and kind of like a mandatory Tuesday. And that's where we bring in breakfast and lunch for all of our associates. And so kind of to the point of, you need people in the office when you're there to build the connection and the relationship with, but also recognizing that, it's, are they coming in from 9 to 2, again, depending on their position and their role, how many of their team members are in town or in the office that week as well. And so I think for us as well, we have a little bit more of a remote workforce. And so one of the other things, while Chicago is our hub, is we've started to, which has felt so great, is to bring people back together in terms of larger regional meetings, or, where we can get bigger groups together and really make sure it's, your phones and your laptops are away. You have 3 days together and you're really focused, because I think that's the other piece of it, is that when you are together, while sometimes it can be tiring, it's making sure that you're investing everything that you have during that time, with everyone who's present.
So you're kind of the arbiters between the workforce and the C-suite, right? So assuming that the pandemic was an accelerant versus something that just happened out of the ordinary. Were you seeing this trend in place already? Because I want to get to the next phase of that question. Was this already something that was in the works? Did you feel that the workforce was saying, hey, you know, we don't want to come in the office every day? Or is this something that just was like, whoosh, whoosh, here we are?
We were seeing signs for sure pre-pandemic. The question came up, you know, from various levels of the organization around more flexibility. And whether it was a parent or if you were caring for a loved one, we would get the requests and definitely see. And we saw that it was trending there when some of our more junior employees would ask about it. It's certainly nothing like it is today, because I do think we are here and we're not going back. You know, the hybrid workforce and flexibility is I don't think it's going to take a back seat, you know, in the next few years. This is sort of where we are. But we did see some signs.
Okay, Kara. I mean, even though you're more industrial based, you do have offices.
Yes, we do. And I think we had seen this coming. And I think some of that relates to the fact that it's harder in our industry, and this is changing, of course, over time, but it's harder to attract and retain qualified women in particular. The whole industry is evolving on that, but I think giving the flexibility to, in particular, mothers who may need it has been very helpful. And we've gotten those requests even before the pandemic. I was one of the requesters, so I had that benefit. It was 1 day as compared to 2. You know, it's been changing, and now there's certainly more of it. But we also have people who need to care for elderly parents or have whatever personal situations where they're saying, I need more flexibility. I'm going to do my work. You've seen me be a performer, so that's not the issue. If I log on, you know, do my work in the evening hours after children are in bed, that's my business as long as I'm performing. So we've always been open to those conversations. It is a different landscape now, and we have more technology. I think that's the big benefit of the COVID situation. Before, you were on a conference call, you were the only one on the call, everyone else is in a room, and you were definitely at a disadvantage. Now that's shifted. There's usually more than one person that's participating over Zoom or Teams or something. So it's a little bit more friendly to those people who may have to be out of the office.
And it's anecdotally, I've spoken with some people who are the only ones in the office to say, why did I commute to get on a Zoom call, to be alone in the office? So that's a whole different story.
Yes.
Courtney.
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone. The writing was on the wall in terms of people, you know, wanting and or needing, you know, flexibility and to balance, you know, life. And so kind of to Kara's point, at past organizations, you started to see, you know, high performing, you know, women in leadership roles that have, you know, now families, and they, you know, have their part of, you know, carpool or practice duty. And so it was, you know, I think you're already starting to see some of that. And like Kara's point of, you know, okay, well, you may have to leave at 3, but then, you know, at around 10 o'clock, here come, you know, the second shift even. I know a lot of, you know, the women that I used to work with would, you know, kind of refer to it as. So it was definitely, the stage was set. I think also outside of our industry, but, you know, the tech industry. So they kind of, once they started to, I think, do some different things, it started to kind of open that up a little bit as well and put the idea out there.
I also assume it has to do with the role that they play within the organization in what function, right? So some you need to be there all the time versus some where you can have that flexibility. So this gets to that next question in terms of the C-suite. And Kara, obviously, you're in the C-suite. And I'd like to, Sherrida and Courtney, I'm sure that there must have been, even though it's always nice to say everybody accepts change, nobody likes change. Nobody likes change. How did you have these difficult discussions with your CEOs and those involved? Sherrida.
So I think what we did is, you know, starting in the pandemic, we spent a lot of time, as you know, as all organizations, right? If you sat in HR, the pandemic pretty much became your job, or handling the pandemic and leading your organization through it pretty much became a full-time job in terms of keeping your employees safe and then figuring out how to return everyone to the office. And so we kept the communication lines pretty open. I think what was great, with our senior leaders. And you're right, Jonathan, it wasn't here's what all the employees want, we're just going to go and do this. But the communication was there. They were open-minded, and we did a lot of benchmarking. Being part of organizations like NAREM was extremely helpful. They, did quite a few polls. I was able to leverage the group there. What are you doing? How are you handling it? And it helped us to formulate some decisions, which always helps senior leaders get over the line when you're able to say, here's what 5 peer firms are doing, how they're thinking about it. This is what I think works for our organization. And I think the other thing we did was initially we didn't just bring everyone back. We kept a very flexible, open sort of, if you can come in 2 days, you came in, and we were very flexible and understanding because everyone had a different circumstance. And now as we're sort of, we're back and we're in this 3-2 model, we still continue to have that open dialogue. Our operating committee meets and focuses specifically on return to office, employee engagement, and all the things that we're doing. And so that I think helps because senior leaders were never, they were part of the conversation for 2 years. Really around this changing, this workplace disruption, and now how do we want our firm to come out on the other end?
Not that you can predict the future, but do you ever see a time when your firm may go to 4-1, or do you think 3-2 is kind of the de facto standard when you talk about benchmarking?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think what we've seen is there are several real estate firms that are 5 days, some of our peers. 3-2 seems to be where folks are landing. We are still, we're 3-2 now. And as I mentioned, we're in discussion on long term, but 3-2 seems to be working. But there could be a 4-1. We'll see how this all evolves, right? When we get into next year, as you mentioned, we have office space. We are owners and operators of office space across the country. And we do still believe that people being together will promote the best culture, and that employee engagement and manager engagement is important. But there also should be a level of flexibility. So I could see a 4-1. We haven't come out yet with where we'll land. We're still in discussion on that.
And just speaking of that 8%, that they're 5 days a week, 82% of that 8% are real estate firms. So you got to, walk the walks. So Courtney, how did that talk go? You had the talk.
Yeah, so I've been with Waterton for 6 months. I joined in December of last year. And so I wasn't here during a lot of, those discussions, but it is certainly still a hot topic, right? Of what do we do now, and how do we want to bring people back, and what do we want it to look like for the future? So those conversations are certainly happening. And I think the important piece is your leadership team being connected to the people of the organization at all levels, because I think that's where, again, every organization I think is going to have a different culture, different expectations, and what culture means to them. And as I mentioned, we have, a fairly, decent size remote workforce, and several of those individuals are in leadership roles. So it has changed a little bit of our dynamic of navigating being in the office. I think I alluded to I'm in Chicago this week, but I sit in Atlanta. And so it is tough for me to talk about the importance of being in the office, when typically it's my home, bookshelf behind me. So it has changed, I think, from that perspective. But overall, I think it's making sure that your organization is constantly, like I said, it's changing. It seems like weekly, if not daily today. In terms of, what's the pulse? What are, not only what are our employees wanting, but kind of, I think to Kara's point earlier, which is, also now we're getting questioned, what are candidates asking? What are they requesting for? Or if they're dropping out of the process, what's the reason? So we're even starting to use some of that information, because again, the talent piece is so difficult. And are we at an advantage or disadvantage, or how do we line up with, other firms when we're looking for the same talent?
Thank you. And, to the audience, I think nearly 200 people registered for this. So it's an important topic and people want to learn. If you have any questions, there's no bad question. Okay. So Kara, how did that discussion go in your office?
It was an interesting discussion. And I think that it's important to recognize at the C-suite level in particular, but throughout our industry, we are numbers driven, we are financially driven. And so the numbers, the benchmarking really help with those discussions, I found. So I took advantage of NAREM, I took advantage of other similar peer groups to really see what other firms were doing. Firms that we aspire to be similar to or can compare ourselves to in certain ways. We didn't want to be a first mover, but we didn't want to be a last mover. We wanted to be sort of, as I always say on the compliance side, we wanted to cross the street in a crowd. So as we looked at what other firms were doing, we wanted to be in that wave as well. And I think it becomes increasingly important on the recruiting side. You know, if we're not in that mix, somewhere in the middle, maybe at the high point of the middle on the more progressive side, we're going to lose some of those candidates who really need that. So we have to kind of stay in touch with the trends and then make decisions that do fit our culture. I think that's an important point that Courtney brought up. We don't want to be so far afield. We're not a tech company. We're not healthcare. So we wouldn't want to look like those because that's a whole different thing, but we have to be somewhere where our employees can be comfortable.
Okay, so now we're talking about attracting talent. Let's talk about talent retention, which is the other part of, you know, keeping your employees happy. Are you having different discussions with them as they see the newbies come in and saying, well, they're getting all kinds of benefits? Are they asking about themselves? How are you retaining? Because there's a lot of competition for talent out there right now. I see people moving back over different companies. I see a lot of velocity in the terms of the way of people moving. How are you retaining your talent?
I think career path and trajectory is very important. Several years ago, for junior talent, someone wouldn't take a job, or an analyst wouldn't ask you on an interview, you know, what's my career path? What's my career trajectory? Or you would get that question, but it was, you know, it wasn't as frequent. Now, you know, when we think about our talent, we have to provide opportunities for them, to upskill and to gain a different skill set. And we try to do that through internal mobility. Especially our top performers, we want to ensure we keep them and build out their real estate skill set. So we don't have an issue with moving people around to the extent that it makes sense for the employee and for the business. That piece is very important, the mobility and the career path, showing them that, okay, if you stay, here's what it looks like, or here's what it can look like. So building out those career paths and trajectories. The other thing that we are having more conversations around as well, because of retaining employees, is succession planning. So ensuring that we look at the middle of the bench. What is our bench strength, and what are we doing to get those people ready, right? Because we don't want them to walk out the door for the next shiny new opportunity. And the market is so competitive that they can. And so we're aware of that. So we want to ensure you're a top performer, you're at this level, but in 3 years, here's where we know, here's where we see you, where we'd like to move you. Having those open discussions, and also being open to someone with different experience taking on, you know, a role that they may not be perfect for. You know, I think maybe we spent too much time doing that in years past, whereas now we can say, okay, you can learn this piece of the job, you'll be good at this piece, but you would be a good fit and we want to keep you. So we're certainly being more open-minded in that area.
Does that include more training? Do you see that more training for all of you? And I want to ask the other question, but is there more training in your organizations to help retain this talent?
We're looking at more training. Yeah, we're devising more plan that would include additional professional development on soft skills and technical skills where needed.
Kara?
We're looking at training quite a bit too. I think that it's important for the employees and for us as an organization to set people up for success. We have an obligation as we bring them into the doors to make a home for them, hopefully in the long term. They have to do their part, but we have to certainly do our part. And one of the things we're doing that ties to retention in this discussion is training our managers better, giving them executive coaching. Because ideally, if there is a candidate, if there is an employee who has concerns around compensation, career path, those concerns, if you have a good, strong relationship with your manager, are things that you're discussing. You're asking about what's coming. Your manager's clear on what you need to do to get to those next levels, to make a jump into a different group. So we're hopefully giving tools through executive coaching. We just are working on a minimum of objective criteria list so that people see an analyst does this. In order to move to the next level of analyst, you have to do these additional things, which can also, I think, help with some of the diversity discussions too, because we have to take more of an objective approach to be fair to all of our colleagues.
Courtney?
Yeah, I would agree. And so whether it's, training or professional development or learning and development within an organization. And so it's certainly something that we've invested in even this year and rolling out, and LinkedIn learning and understanding, again, what are the additional tools and resources? Because I think a challenge is all of this. And while it didn't necessarily occur overnight, it did come on pretty quickly. And so there was a huge shift. And so a lot of companies paused or even cut back, and then the floodgates were open. And so I think everyone's trying to stabilize and prepare and set up and say, here's where we want to go. But at the same time, here are some things that we need to put into place so that we do have transparency around competencies. We do understand, why someone is moving from an analyst position to a senior analyst position, to Kara's point, and that we can go out and attract talent, again, to the other ladies who have spoken, that may not look, be the same of what we looked for on paper. Because in the real estate industry, it was like, oh, we were always open. But at the end of the day, when you go to a hiring manager, it really was like, well, for this one, I really need someone who has, even specific industrial or office or, residential, experience. And so I think it's a great opportunity that the real estate industry has to open up and look at other sectors and say, how can we capitalize on, different talent from different sectors or segments?
So this is the counselors of real estate, and believe it or not, we have a real estate question. So that'll be interesting. So I'm not sure how in the weeds you get on these types of things, but if we're going to a 3-2 or a 4-1 and there's less commuting these work weeks, is there going to be a need for less space? Are you involved with some of those discussions on expanding or contracting space for yourself? And then it really translates into your investment thesis and what kind of funds you raise and where you're going to put that capital. So I'd just like to throw that meatball out there and see where it lands. So we have a real estate question. Kara.
Yes, well, it's something we've been thinking about because we've been hiring quite at a fast pace throughout the pandemic, which is great, but it does mean that all these people, if they're on a 3-2 schedule, they have to sit somewhere. We are more focused on building out a regional presence around our investments. So that helps with this, but we do have a large number of people that have joined us in Boston. And so we did think long and hard about whether we needed to expand our office footprint here. Where we've gone with that discussion is that we will give people who are really adhering to that 3-2 schedule the ability to stay in a dedicated space. If someone comes in less frequently, as per discussions with their manager, and that makes sense for them, they may have to hotel, because it doesn't make sense for us economically to continue to expand our footprint and have 2 people in the office on Fridays. So we want to be thoughtful about how we're using those dollars. And I also think that employees benefit from that thoughtfulness, because maybe we're doing more in terms of the engagement, maybe we're offering more benefits, but they aren't physically dedicated to a particular space. And again, this all comes back to the employee engagement survey. What do they need? What do they want? How many people feel strongly about being able to have an office that's just theirs? I'm guessing that's changing, and people value that less than they did prior to the pandemic.
So Sherrida, you had brought up earlier that you're a real estate company, you own real estate, you invest in offices. So I'd like to hear how Clarion is looking at this.
Yeah, very similar to Kara. So we are not shrinking our space. We hired quite a bit and still have plans to continue hiring. So we're actually building out a little bit more of space here in New York. We're adding cubicles for employees. So we don't plan on pulling back really in any of our offices, because we are growing. Now, because we do still feel like the in-office presence is important, and Kara touched on this. So 3-2 still puts you in the office the majority of the week, and so we do plan to ensure that everyone has a dedicated space. I certainly don't think our long-term work model will be anything less than 3 days. It's it's either three or four potentially, and so we're certainly not shrinking in space. In fact, I would say, some of our offices are getting pretty full. When we think about our West Coast office, we've done some hiring, and, if we continue, we will run out of room there as well. So no, Clarion's not pulling back.
And Courtney?
Yeah, so we just moved into new space, and and so
Is it larger?
and
Is it larger space?
it's larger space, and so on one hand, I think I had heard that the contract was executed, not not much before COVID, and so but we took over a larger space. We are currently more of a hotel setup, so we have a reservation system for for you to reserve your spot prior to coming in. And then one thing that I think I learned of, a couple of weeks ago here was that they did a lot of surveying, prior to building out the space. And so I think that that has really helped people coming back into the office. And so on, to one degree where it's a hotel and, it's everybody's desk is pretty much clear and it looks like no one's here. From a cube perspective, once everyone's packed up and gone, because there aren't personal items left on, in your space. They did spend a lot of time and it's beautiful of our common area spaces. So that was one of the big things of we have a huge common area space with multiple conference rooms or spaces that kind of are off of the kitchen with also booths and, kind of couches and other spaces around and even our conference room. So we of course have a few that have the big table and the chairs but we have several conference room spaces that are just, couches, a big TV monitor, a side table, some other tables. And so it was more of like, how do we, bring the comfort of your home and that feeling, to the office because people were, they got comfortable. I'm tired of sitting at my desk. I'm going to go sit on my sofa and work, for a little bit or from the kitchen table. And so I think that's really been something that we've received a lot of positive feedback on.
It seems like the co-working model is a good model for the permanent spaces as well. Another question is, are you going to increase the amount of square foot space per employee? Because we all know it's been shrinking over the years for health reasons. Do you think you need to have more space due to health, for health purposes?
It's something that we've been looking at. We did try to squeeze in more cubicles because of our space constraints and not willing to take on more space. And that was certainly a discussion that came up, this idea of social distancing and not having people on top of each other, maybe in the same ways that we used to. We feel like that's probably a point in time, and the people who are really sensitive to those types of issues are probably the same ones asking to be on a less than 3-2 or even fully remote schedule. And we do have a couple of employees who it's not a vaccination issue per se, but it's more of a comfort issue. They've asked for that. They've been here a long time. We're willing to accommodate it. So I think it's an interesting discussion that we want to keep an eye on, but we haven't made any changes.
I assume also internal air control, air quality, and all those other things are going to come into play in space design. Courtney?
Yeah, I don't know that it's been, I think obviously as we were building out our space, it was certainly something that was very top of mind because of the social distancing pieces and the timing of when we were opening up our space. But I wouldn't say that we have, continued plans to change anything. I think, the feedback that we've received thus far is that people are comfortable. They enjoy the setup that we have. And we have, kind of side rooms as well, where it's kind of like a telephone room that has a chair and a little side table. So again, I think we did a great job of being thoughtful so that people could distance themselves if they wanted to or needed to, or, kind of make the space work for them. And that it wasn't just, 50 or 100 cubes and that was your only option.
And Sherrida?
Yeah, very similar to Karen, Courtney. So no plans on sort of rearranging our layout across offices. Now we did in the beginning where, if you were in a cube, maybe the person who is across from you didn't come in, and we had sort of schedules like that, but no plans right now. When we, for our New York headquarters, I should say, when we remodeled, which was just about 8 years ago or so, almost 8 years ago, we did have more of an open layout, and we do have very, small conference rooms or phone rooms and, places you can go if you felt uncomfortable. And to Kara's point, for those employees that, may still request an accommodation, due to their comfort level, we'll work with them on potentially a different schedule. But I think for now, we're trying to almost move forward and say, come back comfortable, versus sort of doing anything around space constraints.
Thank you. Here's a quick question, and I guess it's a pretty direct question. How do you prefer someone approach you that is looking for a job at your company?
I think all of us are going to jump to put our email addresses in the chat box.
I mean, you are looking for talent, so if you're talented, find them.
I agree that the people probably, for years have been reaching out directly, and it was almost like you're getting solicitation emails and you just push them to the side. That's not the case anymore. When people are reaching out and they have a solid reason for doing so and they express that in the email, we are definitely picking up the phone, responding to those emails, and having a conversation that we may not have had 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. So it is a buyer's market, seller's market, I guess, isn't it?
I think it's changing, following everything, seeing what Amazon is doing and paying attention to the overall picture here. But I think it's going to take a while. I think there are still a lot of needs to fill. There's a lot of transitioning occurring as people try new jobs that they probably would have been more nervous about taking in the past. I think, especially at the junior levels, that's where we're seeing the attrition most. People want to keep growing. They want to keep developing. They see a lot of opportunities, so they're willing to explore them. I think we expect that some of those people will end up circling back to us, and maybe it's a good thing that they get more experience and see something new and have a different perspective when they do come back.
Courtney, Sherrida, it's pretty much the same. You pick up the phone a lot differently than you used to.
I do. We do a lot of exploratory interviews, informational interviews, as you call them. You would call them, but we do try to engage. And perhaps there's not a fit, but to the extent something comes up, it's great for a candidate to have spent some time with someone in HR or in the HR team, because then we can file away that resume, and we've had some interaction. And to Kara's point, with this market, if you do see a very good resume, you'll have the conversation.
So I want to just touch on something, and there are a couple of other questions, but we discussed this earlier, and you brought it up, Kara, and also Sherrida and Courtney, in terms of DEI, which is a really important, as important of an issue as anything else. Is more than returning to the office, finding qualified candidates, talk about women, people of color, all those things that is necessary for us to grow as an industry. And we also understand, and maybe a lot of our audience doesn't understand, the people that fund you, the institutional investors, the endowments, foundations, pension funds, they are all requiring this of the organizations they invest in to have DEI policies in place. So first of all, obviously it's a growing concern. It's something that you deal with every day, but then you look at people like me who are in the audience as well and say, well, how do I compete in this new marketplace, in this new dynamic, even understanding the issues at play, and for the last 50 years where it wasn't a fair and balanced playing field. So I'd love to put that out to you and to the audience as well, because it can't be easy.
Yeah, Jonathan, it certainly is not easy. In the real estate industry, as you alluded to, for many years, real estate struggled around attracting diverse talent and proactively sourcing candidates. I would say in the last few years, there's been a greater focus, and there's been a greater focus across all organizations, right? After the killing of George Floyd, we saw many organizations kind of pick their heads up a bit. What I would say for real estate that's extremely critical is providing access and education around the fields of real estate, the industry, I should say, at an early stage. So sponsorships and partnerships that organizations can sort of link up with, and we've done quite a bit. We work with a lot of partners to educate around real estate at the undergraduate level. We have in an internship program, we partner with an organization called SEO, and that's been great, and we're seeing a return there where we can bring in analysts from underrepresented groups. And so proactively sourcing candidates, not just educating, but then going out and proactively sourcing. You want to provide access. You want people to know that this industry exists. You can have a great career. You can build wealth. But I think, many years ago, frankly, a lot of people of color And some women did not know. You think about finance, you think about investment banking, you think about all the other sort of glitz and glamour, and real estate was really a relationship business. So it was sort of passing on the resume is what I like to say. You sort of passed on, your neighbor's son, and that's just what kept happening. But I think now we have to really be focused on proactively providing access, looking at a fair balance of resumes that will not all look the same, and providing those opportunities.
Kara, it's a tough discussion.
It is. And I agree with Sherrida and how Clarion's looking at this. I think access is critical. And we do require our hiring managers working alongside HR to have a diverse pool of candidates as they're opening positions. It can't be just the neighbor's son anymore. Or if you have a neighbor's son type referral, that might be fine. That might be the best candidate. But did you even open, the gates a little bit wider to make sure that that's the case? We are requiring that. There is certain reporting that people need to do to show us that they ran a thorough process, at least had the possibility of having someone who was outside the network come in. But then the key from there is the retention piece and making sure that those diverse people come in and feel welcome here and get trained, have the same access to opportunities when they're in the door. So we're definitely trying on that front as well.
And Courtney.
Yeah, agree with Kara and Sherrida. And so I think it's strategic partnerships. We also partner with a few different organizations in terms of access and education. I think that's going to be critical because, again, many of us also within the HR teams, it's lean. And so there are some great organizations out there that have established and built out really great engines that can be feeders. And so that it's not all on the, Waterton as an example, to go out and to take on all these initiatives and start all these programs on their own. So I think it's, we're grateful that we have a leadership team that supports that and engages with that. I think the other piece is, to Kara's point too, is we're being pushed by, our clients to show and more than a story or a narrative. They want to see numbers, right? So going back to, it's show me the data, the metrics, the numbers, the benchmarks, and then how do you, match up? And so I appreciate that in some ways. It's, it's challenging because it's sometimes you don't make as much progress as you want, or maybe you've made a little bit more in some areas. But I think it's great because it means that we're being held accountable. And I think that piece is a little bit new for our industry. So while we're all trying to figure out how do we track all of this, how do we publish and summarize all this information, and what do we do to get there? But I think it's great that we've, have clients that are saying we want to see the numbers.
Yeah, and unfortunately and fortunately, when change happens, some people don't like, as I said earlier, people do not like change, and if it affects them directly, they like it less. So it's heroic what you're doing. So thank you for that. Another real estate oriented question, which is great. Is it possible that people will suffer career-wise if they are present in the office less often? Because I heard one, I forgot who it was. I think it was Morgan Stanley. Do you want a career or do you want a job? Right. And if you want a career, you show up in the office. If you want a job, don't show up in the office. And so I don't think it's a little brutal of a philosophy, but I'm just curious from the audience. What do you think?
I think that attitude is changing. I think, I'm from the law firm world. So there was a lot of emphasis on FaceTime, and you had older partners who really valued that piece. But I think we all know there's people who are in the office all day long, walking around and not being very efficient. So I don't think personally, being here is the catch-all. I think it's really on the employee themselves to demonstrate their value, to kind of put themselves out there, to get involved in different initiatives, to show their skills and their willingness and their great attitude. And that really makes a difference regardless of where they're sitting. And you do maybe have to be more intentional in showing that if you're remote, but it's still certainly possible.
Yeah, I agree with Kara. Yeah, I was going to say intentionality is so important in a hybrid work model. And I do think, you have to show up when you need to. And again, with most, I think all of us, and maybe with the exception of Courtney, where there's a little bit more flexibility, but being in person 3 days. And then also if you need it to be 4, if you're on a deal team and you need to be here on a Friday because you're preparing something for investment committee on Monday, you know, you need to make that choice in that moment. Am I going to come in and labor with my team and get this done and get this over the finish line? And so there will be days where, you know, or weeks where it may not be as flexible, and you have to make that decision because the work dictates that you'll need to be together with your team. I think also organizations can help to support that by just technology. I think, you know, what we've changed all the technology in our conference rooms here. So in any given meeting, you walk to the conference room, you have at least 6 people on screen and you've got 4 people in the room. And that, you know, is never like that, right? Maybe you were the only one on a conference call. If you worked from home one day, you were just on the phone. But that makes a big difference. The actual visual actually, you know, makes a difference when you walk by. You're like, this is the new way we work.
You know, and I think culture has changed. If you have your first job out of high school or out of college and it's remote, the culture's already changed. Just wait 18 years when these first kindergartners, their first interactions were this versus actually being in person. They're going to be wired completely different than we are. Courtney.
Yeah, sorry, I had a visual of what that might, what challenges might come with that. But yeah, I think it's intentional, and I think a big, you know, thing is, you know, I think that a big shift is moving from, you know, phone, which now seems kind of crazy, but to video. And so I think it's understanding when it's important to show up on video and to be seen and to participate and to not have your camera off. And so it is, I think, a unique situation because it depends on the team, it depends on your function and the role and where you want to be. But it is, you know, a lot of it, because there's not a lot of training around it, I don't think yet, but of understanding and for employees to have the, you know, understand the discretion of how and when to show up, kind of, you know, going back to the intentionality piece. But it's, you know, when does it make sense for me to get on a plane or for me to get on a train to go to the office? And when does it make sense for me to be on video? I think one of the other things that's been interesting is, you know, sometimes, you know, even when you're in an office, many of us take, if the Teams or the Zoom link is an option, many of us take those calls from our office. So I think that's the other piece too, that again, we're still figuring out and trying to understand. So does it matter that Sherrida's in the office, but she's in the meeting from, you know, her workspace and not in a larger conference room? So don't have the answer to that, but I think it's just, again, things to note and to continue to observe.
Isn't it
I think it's the same conversation, but just sort of amplified, because I think we would all mentor people that are in our organizations to ask questions, to speak up. But now it takes that extra step. Go off video, then ask the question. But if, you know, the conversation hasn't changed dramatically, it's still a mentoring issue in my perspective.
Could you just dial it back 2 years and 5 months ago? Did you even think we'd be having this kind of discussion? I mean, isn't that amazing? It's kind of mind blowing when you say, wow, we're really talking. First of all, we're doing this, but webinars have been around for a long time, but we've really come into a world where we had no training, right? We've had to train ourselves. And so the question of training came up. And I'm sure, just as an aside, I mean, you talked about soft skills a little earlier. Are you putting your professionals through like presentational training for Zoom and for webinars and this kind of communication? Just curious. That's my question.
We did do some of that through the pandemic. We rolled out a few sessions for particular levels of the organization in terms of professional presence for Zoom. But I think one thing that the organizations, and we did this, but you have to focus on, is that manager-employee relationship in the hybrid work model, because the manager plays such a key role in the employee experience when you're in this hybrid work model. So we trained up our managers on the giving feedback, right, in a hybrid environment. You know, everything from just ensuring showing up on time, cameras on, being prepared, making sure your employees feel like they're in the room. And now we've obviously transitioned back into the office, but there's still days you'll have a catch up with your employee, and you may be in the office and they may be working from home that day. So manager training, I think, will become increasingly important, and something that we're taking a close look at and anticipate rolling out a few additional sessions.
Kara, before
Yes, we're very open to the idea of different trainings. I think it's easy to take for granted that people should just be able to get there and be, trained by their managers, to Sherrida's point. But I think it's something that we need to keep a sense of. And, I always tell people, and I tell myself this, that it can be very awkward to present on Zoom or in the virtual setting. And you have to keep trying. You have to find opportunities, even like this one, to get out there and practice.
Yeah.
And if you show you want it, that goes so far. And the company will help you find those opportunities. Even, they could be helpful on the recruiting front, having a conversation at some school that wouldn't typically be part of our recruiting process. Get out there, just talk about what you do, practice those skills, because there are more opportunities.
And finally, Courtney, and then we're going to bring Marilee back to wrap this up. Do you have that kind of training, or are you thinking about that kind of training?
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that we're thinking about, and we've incorporated small components, I would say, of that into some of our, existing training programs. And it's just, I think it's kind of, to the point of, it's not necessarily a new conversation, but the content and what's covered is probably a little bit different. So yeah, I agree.
Well, Kara, Sherrida, Courtney, I want to thank you for this incredible conversation. It was quite, the hour flew by. And Marilee, would you have a few words as well? You're on mute. We're talking about training.
Yeah, I'm still in training. I'll tell you, after all these years, still trying to get down the technology. Let me add my thank you to all of you. Jonathan, great hosting. Sherrida, Kara, Courtney, thank you for your candor and openness and for sharing with us. It really was interesting. So recordings of today's session will be available to all program registrants, and it's also available on cre.org. I think you might want to refer back to it. Please join us next month for our presentation of the counselor's annual product, the top 10 issues affecting real estate. This is really a hallmark program of our organization, and I promise you that the 2022 list is both thought-provoking and compelling. And until next month, when we hope to see you again, on behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate and NAREIM, thank you very much for attending this session of What's Next for Real Estate and for the Life Experience. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.